Good evening, everybody. Hi, everybody. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lynn Jewell, Chair of Arlington's Committee of 100, and it's my privilege, my special privilege, to welcome you to our May 13 video webinar program. This is our new format here, well, at least for now. We will all be changed with our encounters with the COVID. We just don't know how yet, do we? Well, here's one change where the Committee of 100 is adapting. So here's looking at you through my computer window. And I want to say especially hi to our speakers in their own living rooms, Teresa, Brad, and Beth. Wave, wave, thank you. More from these special guests a little later. But first of all, we're here tonight to learn about and discuss the criminal justice reform movement taking place right here in Arlington. It focuses on a smarter, more equitable, more compassionate judicial approach. Our panel of leaders tonight is right in the middle of the reform. They will discuss their priorities and learn how the system has had to make adjustments in dealing with the ever-present COVID-19. And like you sitting out there, I'm still tired of looking out of my window too much of the time in the interest of social distancing and isolation. When will this pandemic be over? And what will we look like afterward? Possibly some of you have noticed the cocktail hour starting a little earlier and lasting a little longer than before. But now, I have a little necessary and important housekeeping chores. The Arlington Committee of 100 has been a vital part of Arlington since 1954, and we find ourselves adapting to the new normal after the COVID assault. Count on us. We are still doing our open and vigorous discussion of the issues involving community life in Arlington. We, of course, are always looking for new members to join us in our monthly forums. And with that, right here, a little plug for our next meeting, which is June 10, Candidate Debate Night. A special election on July 7 has been called to fill the vacated seat by the tragic passing of our friend Eric Gutshaw. The candidates are Bob Cambridge, Republican, Susan Cunningham, Independent, and Takis Karantonis, Democrat. So stay tuned for that, and you will find all the ongoing information you need on our site. It's ARLC100 at ARLC100.org. There are many people who make these programs happen, but let me recognize just a few. First of all, Patrick Hope, our lead on this program. Patrick, please stand up right there in your own kitchen and take a bow. Thank you. Production assistant behind the scenes are by Scott Pedowitz and Brian Marquin, huddled in their own homes right at this moment to help produce this program. Your bartender for a social hour is none other than yourself. Beverage of your choice, too. Dinner selections and hors d'oeuvres, as usual, prepared by you, dear participant. Next, my producer, Scott, will cue up the slides on your screens. The first slide in the list is the Committee of 100 board, and the subsequent slides describe how to use your Zoom screens for questions. Here's our board for next year. The new executive board will take over. The executive committee will take over, and that is Hannah Dannenfelser, chair, Gary Laporte, vice chair, Lizette Arias, secretary, Timon Honda, treasurer, and Lynn Jewell, that's me, past chair. I will be passed soon. Okay, and the next slide. Continuing on the board will be Jean Broyhill, Link Cummings, Bob Garcia, Patrick Hope, Brian Marquin, and Scott Pedowitz. Joining as new members of our Committee of 100 board, Michael Anderson and John Weistat. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and here's the retiring board members. Ann Beachide, Sharon Dorsey, Marjorie Hobart, who was chair in 1988-89, Anita Nolan was chair in 2009 and 10, and Chuck Morley. 5 folks Long-time folks are leaving. I was just talking to Marjorie today, and she says she's been active since 1988. That's a long time, folks, to work so hard on this community program. I can't say enough about these folks retiring from the board. They have served our Committee of 100 community easily 60 plus years cumulative, faithfully doing all the things that need to be done. So upon farewell to each of you, I humbly bow and salute you with a toast, looking at you on my screen. Congratulations again, good people. Now, let's move into this. This is how viewers out there will be able to interact with our speakers tonight. This is the screen you'll see, and down at the bottom with our little yellow circle there, it's Q&A. Click on that. And that will take you to the next slide here, Q&A little pop-up screen, pop-up little chat bar. So you write your question, type your question here as a yellow arrow, and you may enter the questions during the presentation and continue throughout the Q&A session. You may address your question to any or all of the speakers, but any or all of them will have the opportunity to respond to. And the last thing, please ask your question in the form of a question and try to make it short so we can have as many questions. We never get to all our questions, but we can have as many questions answered by our panel as possible. Okay, Parisa, you're first, followed by Brad and then Beth Arthur. Parisa is the Commonwealth's attorney for Arlington Falls Church. Welcome, Parisa. And that's you. Oh, is your microphone on? Wait a minute. Yeah, unmute.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. I am delighted to be here, and I realized just a few minutes ago that exactly 51 weeks ago, I had the pleasure of a debate in front of the Committee of 100. And so it's really exciting to be back here and to be in the role of the Commonwealth's attorney. I wanted to just start out with saying that it's important to note that at the outset that my coming into this role was the first time in anyone's living memory that somebody outside of the office was taking a leadership position. And so what we're doing in all ways is new to everybody. It's new faces, it's new everything, and it's new for the policy, for the stakeholders, for the office, and for the courthouse and the entire community. So I wanted to start with just talking a little bit about the goals that I had in coming in. And if you could move to that first slide, I would be very grateful. Excellent. So the goals that I had were, establishing trust and professionalism, creating rapport, and then beginning to fulfill my campaign promises. And I've been working on this since July, or since June, excuse me, even though I didn't take the general election for granted. So in terms of establishing and maintaining trust and professionalism in the office, I started out with a very intensive questionnaire to everybody in the office to get a sense of values, to get a sense of what was worked and what didn't, so that we could build on the things that were working and improve on the things that weren't. And I met with staff one-on-one. I enlisted the help of an experienced attorney who'd been a prosecutor at the Department of Justice and also a public defender and the general counsel of the Public Defender Service in DC who had no stake in the matter, to help interview and to help assemble a team that is, I think, one of the best teams in the country, because we've managed to bring sort of like-minded people together. We've managed to bring people who are willing to pick up a shovel and do the hard work. And we talked together and developed together our guiding principles. In terms of establishing trust and rapport, that goes without saying that, it's with stakeholders like the police department, both all four of the ones that we work with, airport, metro, Falls Church, City of Falls Church, and ACPD. Our good sheriff and her staff, DHS, the Defense Bar, the court, OAR, other nonprofits. And, you know, we were really lucky that, that I had a good relationship with Sheriff Arthur even before the election, through the work that we had done together in the Arlington Dems. Clearly, I needed to work on building bridges with police. I don't think that's a secret to anybody. And I did, you know, by immediately starting to talk to the leadership. And then we also did through meetings, both with the leadership, but also we had several large fora for police that were over an hour each. And we had some very difficult conversations. The goal of which was for me to find common ground and to start the process of building trust. We have worked together, and I have a great relationship with our liaisons and with the leadership, and, you know, working with from patrol, you know, trying to gain the trust of patrol, and working all the way through the folks that handle the really serious crimes. And then in terms of fulfilling campaign promises, you know, as I said, I didn't take the general for granted, and I approached this carefully, but, you know, we started working on the transition months before the actual event happened, and, you know, really trying to set out and create and communicate guiding principles that, you know, would be our North Star, so to speak. There's a lot that I couldn't have anticipated, COVID-19 being the most obvious. But from the first to the last, I wanted to make sure that we had a process that would create a seamless transition. Because again, I was aware that this was the first time in anyone's living memory that somebody who had not grown up, so to speak, in the office was coming in. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. The four core functions of the job are to set priorities and policies. Some of those are the guiding principles I talked about. To engage with the community. Some of that I'm going to talk about a little bit later, is, you know, by strengthening the sexual assault response team, by working with OAR to try to, you know, sort of expand the work that they do and strengthen them. And advocacy, I will talk about as well. That primarily falls in terms of the work that I did with the legislature and management. And that is just sort of really the core building of the team, and you know, making sure that the office runs smoothly. Next slide, please. In terms of policies and priorities, we started out with cash bail. That was one of the easiest things to start with, is just stop asking for it. And, you know, if somebody is a flight risk and a danger to the community, then we've asked for them to be held. And if they're not, then we've tried to have them released on appropriate conditions, which has strained our good sheriff's resources a bit, but I'm happy to work with her to beef up the pretrial team so that we can do more of what we've been doing. And you know, while judges will still sometimes impose cash bail over our objection, we continue to request, you know, either release on conditions or that somebody be held. And you know, we check the list, the jail lists, to make sure that what we're doing is not creating more incarceration inadvertently. And you know, we're doing that because we trust the data, and we trust the data that shows that cash bail, you know, the existence of cash bail doesn't keep communities safe. Just as many people will show up, just as many people will reoffend or not reoffend with cash bail or without cash bail. The key is to make sure that they have the community support system to get to where they need to be, and hopefully expand our social safety net so that people can get on the right track while they're out. Our fight against the cash bail continues, and I will continue working with our legislators to advocate for bail reform for those very reasons. The issue of marijuana, of course, comes up, and we started looking at the cases very carefully and not proceeding with cases that were simple possession. Our position is that it's a waste of resources to prosecute things that don't actually enhance public safety. And our view is that if it doesn't involve children, it doesn't involve public use, if it doesn't involve driving or distribution, then it doesn't really have a public safety value, and our resources, which are very limited, are better spent elsewhere. And so we started doing that and focusing really on the more serious cases, including looking carefully at some cold cases and that sort of thing. Our office has implemented changes to make discovery fair for all parties. Of course, it's a balancing act. We have to balance due process with safety, and we are doing that by making sure that what needs to be redacted is redacted, what needs to be for attorney's eyes only is attorney's eyes only. And we no longer require defense attorneys to come to the office and take notes on files. Instead, we're providing electronic discovery wherever we can. We are permitting defense attorneys and their teams to come and scan documents when it's too much for us to email. And we're letting people come in and make copies of CDs. We have a long ways to go in terms of the technology, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the technology problems that we face and what we're doing to try to address those. But we are doing the best we can with our current technology and trying to improve our technology. We're also working with partners, as I said, to balance the safety and needs of victims and survivors and witnesses. So we're working with Doorways, we're working with the CAC, we're working with FACT, really to ensure the privacy and safety while we're honoring our ethical obligations to the defense. I'm ready for the next slide, please. So some of the priorities and policies that we have are, in terms of substance, are youth diversion, restorative justice, and the behavioral health docket. We've worked with the county's court services unit, the juvenile intake unit, to put procedures in place that will divert more kids out of the court system and have made them sort of the first stop, since their focus is very much on diversion for petitions. And the reason why is that if a kid can be put on the right track without ever entering a courtroom, that is a success for the community, it's a success for them, and it's a success for us. In terms of restorative justice, we were able to help secure an expert from the Annie Casey Foundation who was loaned to Arlington County to create a restorative justice program that includes programs in the schools, programs that people can refer each other to and themselves to in the community, and also in the legal system. And Leanne Roselle, who's the executive on loan, is one of the foremost national experts on restorative justice. And we've already started the working groups for the legal system, for the school system, as well as the community. And we are very excited that this has the potential really to be a national model of how we can rethink both community ties and how we can rethink how the criminal legal system works. For the behavioral health docket, our plans it's been approved. Our plans have been delayed. The docket is available through the very, very hard work of Brad Haywood, who's with us tonight, for cases before somebody has to plea. So it means that we don't necessarily have to give the mentally ill a criminal record. The option is still there for a post plea, but it was really important, the work that Brad did and community advocates did to make sure that the ability to go through the mental health court was available without having to plead guilty to something and end up with a criminal record. And we've established a collaborative process for making the docket successful. And, we are going to be evaluating the efficacy of the docket in certain time periods after its launch in order for us to tinker and adjust and make sure that it is the best docket and suited for our community and what our community faces. Like I said, it's been delayed because the COVID-19 required that the in-person trainings that were scheduled for March and May be postponed. And we're hoping that we'll figure out either a web-based way to do it or that we'll be able to do it in person sooner rather than later. Next slide, please. So, one of just a few of the other things that happen, and I should really have switched the order on this now that I think about it. I want to talk a little bit about the sexual assault response team first and go backwards. The SART was mandated by statute in 2009, and it got up and running a few years ago. And what it is an opportunity for community engagement and collaboration that involves a diverse array of community partners. So it's Doorways, it's Project Peace, it's our office, it's our victim witness program, our police departments, the FACT unit, representatives from the military, Marymount, the county board, and others. And this year in particular, what we've decided to do is make the SART more active. So we've increased the number of times that we meet, and we've created work groups so that we can work on the discovery policies. We've created work groups so that we can work on data and what we want to collect in terms of data so that we can help educate the community and to try to make it more like Project Peace so that it has a goal of prevention, it has a goal of education, and then it has a goal of response as well. And I mentioned our data visualization project. We have been trying to get insight into where there needs to be additional community outreach and education. And at some point I would like, if we can make it public while maintaining the privacy that is statutorily required, to use it to not only educate and prevent, but to help reduce the shame and the stigma and the barriers that exist right now to reporting, and to help survivors feel less alone and encourage them to take advantage of the resources that the community has available. In terms of juror participation, we've always had juries, but there's a rule that allows the parties to strike people from the jury without any explanation. And these are called preemptory strikes. And I wanted us to rise to a higher standard and stop using, as the prosecution, these preemptory strikes, because what they do is they reduce participation in the process. And I wanted to make sure that there was additional transparency, but also that we helped people discharge their civic duty. And being on a jury is a civic duty. And having spoken to jurors who were struck, there's the real sense when you're struck for no reason that there was something wrong with you and that sort of thing. And so we wanted to make sure that the entire community was included in juries. So if there's a reason, because somebody might be biased to strike them, then obviously that's a for-cause strike, and we will continue to do those. But we won't be striking people just for no reason at all. And finally, in terms of COVID, we were very lucky in Arlington that with Brad and with Sheriff Arthur, we were all able very early on in March to get together and work together and collaboratively to thin out the jail population, and to get the message out to the community that the cases were being postponed, that we were trying to reduce the number of people within the courthouse, and that we were doing everything we can to keep both people who are incarcerated safe by thinning out the population, but also the correctional officers and our staff and the public defender staff and the court staff and the clerk of court and all of those folks. Next slide, please. So technology, as I said, is a little bit of our Achilles heel. There are some serious technological deficiencies that we're working to correct. The first was that there was no way to provide discovery other than email, which really isn't suited in every situation. So we are working on shifting from a network that's inside of the office to a cloud-based system that would allow us to share records and video securely. And when COVID appeared on the horizon, it became very clear that we had little to no teleworking capabilities because of the way our network was set up and the general lack of access that we had to any of our work when we were not inside of the office. And we are working on that, but we have some issues like, we have computers that only have 128 gigabytes of memory, but we routinely work on cases that have 30 gigabytes of data. And so there are sort of data storage problems that we need to solve. And we are working on them, and the county has been great in working with us. One of the other things that we've done that's really radical, but radical because it hadn't been done before, but not radical because it's really the right way to do things, is we've moved to a model of vertical prosecution. What that means in the most simple ways is that if it's one attorney, one case, and that attorney is on the case for the duration of the case. And the purpose of it is, to make sure that police officers and victims and witnesses and defense attorneys know exactly who is working on the case, so that discovery can be provided early, and so that any deals that need to be worked out and any wrinkles are worked out, and so that there's really accountability and ownership within the office. We met with the judges. So we've studied the process thoroughly. I've met with folks in the office, and everybody has had input on it. And we have just rolled it out, and the early reports, even though court hasn't started up again, are that people are really happy having ownership with the cases and feeling like the work that they're putting into a case isn't wasted. Doesn't mean that somebody else has to then go and do the work again because the case got continued, because they now have that case. In terms of training, we are we're doing what one of my assistants jokingly called Reform University. We are bringing training into the office, about things like collateral consequences, and ways to use data and that sort of thing. And part of that is a plan to conduct a prison visit. And it's a thing that most prosecutors don't do, and that's go to the place where you're sending people. And I think it's really important that no one should be sending anyone to prison without having been there themselves. And I don't mean the visit to be something like an hour, where it's a tour, but more of a true visit where we're sitting down with both the people that work in the prison and the people who are incarcerated in the prison, and eating with them and really sharing insights with them. Next slide, please. So advocacy, a lot of criminal justice reform happened in the last legislative session. There's still a lot more to be done in future ones, but obviously the direct credit has to go to the legislators themselves, including Patrick Hope, and others in our delegation. But a lot of credit has to go to activists like Justice Forward and the ACLU and other organizations for pushing forward reform. And as a central part of my campaign was to engage in advocacy and do it transparently, I didn't want to remain on the sidelines, and I went to Richmond several times to meet with legislators and lobbied myself. I'm going to go quickly through some of the things that I lobbied for. That is raising the age that a child could be tried as an adult to 16, making sure that the disorderly conduct was taken out of the code for things that happened by students on school property that couldn't fit into some other criminal code, and so were often sort of shoehorned into disorderly conduct. It was important to me that juveniles be eligible for parole after serving 20 years so that they have an incentive to invest in themselves and to make sure that every youth who ends up incarcerated has a chance for rehabilitation. And I fought for legalization. We got decriminalization and study of legalization, and we're gonna work hard for more. And when I say legalization, I don't mean sort of everything like we're gonna have pop-up stands on our streets. It's really with regulation so that we treat it in the same way that we treat alcohol, for example.
Teresa, can I intervene here? This is Lynn.
Yep.
Can we move on maybe to Brad and Beth?
Yep.
Arthur?
Sorry, I was going through the slides and
come back to some of these later.
Yep. I'm actually just about done, so
Okay.
I can wrap up and pass it along.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. The writ of actual innocence and trying to make sure that juries are informed of punishments. And I will pass it along now.
Oh, okay. Teresa, thank you much. Thank you much. Thank you much. I'm sure we'll have a bunch of questions. Next will be Brad Haywood, Public Defender of Arlington Falls Church. Welcome, Brad. And I think you're queued up for your PowerPoint. Brad, take your mute off here. Yeah, there we go. Nope. Now you're on, Brad. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm Brad Haywood. I'm the Chief Public Defender for Arlington County and the City of Falls Church. And actually in my spare time, not that I have any of that, I run a advocacy organization called Justice Forward Virginia, and we do policy advocacy and criminal justice reform. So this topic is pretty much my whole professional life. It's something I'm very passionate about, and in large part because of what I see as the gravity of the problem in the United States, and it's as much of a problem in Virginia as it is anywhere else. Over the past 50 years, if you could go to the next slide. So over the past 50 years, America has created a system that's really good at putting a lot of people in jail. It's really good at creating stark racial disparities. It's not very good at rehabilitating anyone. It is very good, however, at preventing people from getting second chances and effectively ending their lives. But at the same time, with all of this harshness, I guess, that's baked into the system, we're not lowering crime rates, we're not making victims feel any better, and we're also spending a heck of a lot of money. These are problems that you hear about in the national media, but they're just as much of a problem statewide and in Arlington. And that is something I know that was a big topic last year during the Commonwealth Attorney's campaign. But it is just a fact. It's a fact that Arlington has taken a very traditional approach to criminal justice for a pretty long time. It's I don't think any one person's fault, but it's never made sense to me I've lived in Arlington County for 17 years since finishing law school. And I know our community, it's a well-educated, thoughtful community. We care about our neighbors, we care about the disadvantaged. We've got a lot of great local stakeholders who want to, run their agencies in a humane, compassionate, evidence-informed way, like the sheriff and the Department of Human Services. And it just, to me, it never really made sense why we were stuck where we were. So it's a matter of, how do we make progress? If you can move to the next slide. So I'll just, Parisa talked about some of these, and I'm sure you know a lot about all of them, and we're going to talk more about them with the question and answers. But just some of the examples of things that were and are still, and to a certain extent, going on in Arlington. Arlington, as you all know, doesn't get a ton of violent crime. So, where do you see the issues that are prevalent in the justice system in Arlington? You see them very much in drug interdiction, so the war on drugs. I think everybody knows that for a long time, Arlington was pretty aggressive in prosecuting possession of marijuana. That was creating a disproportionate impact, especially on the minority communities and also poor people. Another phenomenon that is a major issue in criminal justice reform, it gets kind of nuanced and kind of wonky and in the weeds, something called the trial penalty. And that basically means we put so much power into the hands of prosecutors, they can make the risk of a trial so great that pretty much any reasonable person would accept a plea deal. And you think about things like mandatory minimums. That's certainly part of the problem, but Virginia has a lot of different types of policies and criminal procedure that essentially enable a prosecutor to charge a mandatory minimum. Effectively, like in essence, it ends up being like a mandatory minimum, having the same kind of impact in terms of affecting the calculus. What is a defendant going to be thinking about when they decide whether to take a deal or not? You raise those risks high enough, you scare somebody enough, they're looking at life in prison, they're looking at a 10-year mandatory minimum. Even if they think that they're innocent, or even if they actually factually are innocent, or even if they're not guilty of the crime that's been charged, and they might be guilty of something less. When you're staring at 10 years, sometimes a year and a half looks good. Just today, or just 2 days ago, actually, the DA in Boston, Rachel Rollins, she asked for, I think, 60-some people who had been convicted falsely based on bad DNA evidence to be acquitted. All of them, or to be exonerated, all of them had pled guilty. So it's a pretty good example. You raise the stakes for a defendant, and very frequently you can get them to do whatever you want. So that was something that was going on a lot in Arlington, something that I know that Parissa's office has been trying to scale back. You see that in Arlington until this year, Arlington, for a similar type of nonviolent crime, like a property offense, Arlington was 3 times as more likely to end up getting a felony conviction out of it. I was in private practice for about 7 years before becoming the chief public defender. I practiced in other places for quite a long time. It was just a very stark difference between, when you make a mitigation argument to a prosecutor, can't you offer a misdemeanor in this case? The person's in college, or, no prior record. It was just a lot more difficult to get what we viewed to be fair outcomes. And another big issue, I think, that remains a problem in Arlington, it's something that we're going to have to address moving forward, is the sort of the supervision, basically the issue of probation supervision, which it is turned into its own beast that is sort of out of control at this point. Of course, some people, if they've been convicted of an offense, there are services they need. They need treatment. It might be a good idea for a probation officer to monitor their progress in the community. But if you follow anyone around, and micromanage their life for 4 years, you're going to finally come up with something that they did wrong. I mean, you could probably follow me around for 6 months, and if I were on probation, I'd probably be violated. And I'm sure that's true for most of the people who are watching this. And I feel like in Arlington, we do have an issue with over supervision, keeping people on conditions too long. And that's the type of thing that in Arlington actually leads to mass incarceration type practices. Next slide, please. So what does reform look like? Reform is really a matter of rolling back these little things that led to the problem that we've found ourselves with. One issue in Arlington that many people don't know about is, and I take responsibility for this as a member of the defense bar, is that for a long time our defense bar was not stepping up and being zealous advocates especially for disadvantaged people. I took over the Arlington Public Defender's Office 2.5 years ago, and at that time, there were at least two judges in Arlington who refused to appoint the public defender to cases. And it wasn't because my office was doing a bad job. It seemed to be because of other reasons. So what I did when I first took over was made a point of it, because that is not allowed by statute to appoint. If someone qualifies for a public defender, they're supposed to get a public defender. So we put all of our advocacy energy into making our office was appointed to cases, because we knew we were going to do a great job for each one of our clients. And in fact, the data actually shows that public defenders get better outcomes for their clients than private court appointed attorneys do. So we accomplished that. Now our office is getting all of the cases that we're supposed to get according to the code, representing all the indigent people who need court-appointed counsel. There have been some issues. I think some of the things, a lot of the things here Chris already talked about, so I'll just skip over them. But reforming prosecutorial practices, creating alternatives to what we're used to, alternatives in terms of diversion programs. So we get people out of the common track, the traditional track, by finding a new track, either by never going down the current track that we're on, or finding the earliest possible point to get us off the normal track of prosecution, conviction, incarceration. We want to find ways to give people second chances. So to use diversion programs as often as we can, to trust the principles behind these and the data that shows that they work. And I think in Arlington, what's so great, and what's going to continue to be so great as we get accustomed to working collaboratively with one another, is we solve the problem when we work together. It's uncommon in an adversarial system, but when you can find ways to work together and collaborate, obviously you're going to be a lot more effective. Lastly, on this slide, I'd just say legislation and broader institutional and policy advocacy can make a huge difference. My group, Justice for Virginia, we wrote, I think, 11 or 12 bills this past year. We got 3 of them passed. A couple of them are going to have a huge impact, especially for indigent defendants. And we have great advocates. We have a great delegation. Delegate Hope was a huge ally of ours, just a really tremendously effective legislator, and actually helped get one of those bills passed for us. And the last slide, COVID. I think we're probably going to talk about this in the discussion. I know we're short on time, so I will just, you have that there. You can take a peek at that, and if you have questions, we can answer those in the Q&A. So I will pass it along to Sheriff Arthur.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Thank you much. And yes, we'll move along. And Sheriff Beth Arthur, welcome, Beth. And you're on.
Good evening. Thank you, Lynn and Patrick, for having us join you tonight. I appreciate the opportunity. It's kind of odd not having somebody flashing in front of us that we've gone too long. So I'll try to skip through the slides. If you want to go to slide 1 fairly quickly. Just quickly, in case anybody doesn't know or understand the difference between the Sheriff's Office and the Police Department. I'm elected by the citizens of Arlington County, and I'm honored to have been reelected last year. I'm currently in my 20th, almost 20 years as the sheriff here in Arlington. And my responsibilities are, I run the jail, I run the courts, I run the jail, all the jail operations. I'm responsible for the security in the courthouse and courtrooms. We serve civil process and criminal warrants. And, for the county, we transport individuals in our custody. I run the Arlington ASAP program, and I run the pretrial program for Arlington, which is a little unusual. And that program will also be participating in the behavioral health care docket. And I am, as I said, not primary law enforcement, but my staff are law enforcement certified. And we do partner a lot with the police department on various community activities. So you might see my staff out and about in the community. If you want to go to the next slide. So the cornerstone of the Sheriff's Office, I've been there 34 years. When I came there, our real focus has always been the majority of our staff and our budget is the jail. And we have always had the attitude that we're there to treat everybody with dignity and respect, whether it's dealing with individuals that are remanded to our custody, dealing with individuals in the courts and in the courthouse or out in the community. And so we have always, in some respects, I think, been very much in the forefront of how we treat people and helping them become productive members of society when they leave the jail. And so that's really been our focus. Our mission is partnering to make the justice system work. So as I mentioned, we partner and work with the police department on a regular basis on a variety of community activities and events. We go to the same academy as the police department does. And so we're very intertwined in our jobs as it relates to working with the community. We strive to partner with various other agencies within the community. We, Offender Aid and Restoration provides a lot of programs in the detention facility working with us. We work with the Department of Health and Human Services, who run an addictions, corrections, and treatment program in the jail, as well as run mental health services in the jail. And so they're very intricately involved with our staff and providing a great deal of programs. We also partner with adult education to run educational programs to include GED, so that individuals that may have dropped out of high school can obtain their GED while they're incarcerated in the jail. So we provide somewhere in the neighborhood of 65 programs normally in the jail, so that individuals have opportunities to gain, whether it's taking a class on anger management or employability skills, or going through treatment programs, so that they can better themselves and return to the community with some tools and resources so that they can be more productive members of our society. That's really been a focus of ours forever. In addition, I mentioned that we run the pretrial program. Today, we have about 293 people in the pretrial program here in Arlington, and those are individuals that are placed in that program from general district court, mostly general district court. Some of them come from circuit court, and then we have some from juvenile and domestic relations court, although there are no juveniles that are in this program. Part of the behavioral health docket, as Parissa mentioned, will be pre-sentence, so the individuals will be placed in this program prior to actually being sentenced, so they'll be in the pretrial program. We have gotten approved, despite the current budget circumstances that we find ourselves in, a position that will be partnering with Department of Health and Human Services and the courts, and working with pretrial, so that anyone that's remanded into this behavioral health docket, they will be working with the pretrial program and Department of Health and Human Services to ensure that they complete whatever the courts and the Commonwealth Attorney and the public defender or the defense bar work out as whatever they're going to be doing through that program. In addition, the pretrial program, as I said, we have about 290 people in that program. That I have 4 staff that work in that program that are managing, and the jail currently has 215 people in the population. Some of that is COVID related, some of that is our new Commonwealth Attorney related, and some of that is we have seen our jail population going down over the last several years. If you want to go to the next slide, Patrick asked me if I would just talk a little bit about what we are doing with COVID, because I do have individuals that are remanded to my custody. We have worked very closely with the county public health, Dr. Varghese, through the Virginia Health Department, and what ways, how we should be managing the detention facility. Some of the things we're doing is taking temperatures of everybody that comes in and out in the jail, and we've started doing that in the courthouse. We're taking the temperatures of all of the individuals remanded to our custody that come into the jail, and we are also so we're doing that daily for everybody that's in our custody, and we're doing that for anybody that is remanded to our custody, and we're doing very thorough medical screenings of anyone that's arrested that's going to not be released back out into the public, that is going to actually come into the jail. Next slide, please. The other thing we've done is we've created 2 when I say two male, two female intake units, so that everybody that is remanded to the jail for a 14-day window, we have male side and a female where they go into that housing unit. They're monitored very, very closely. And then on the, at the end of 14 days, on the 15th day, we shut down that unit and continue monitoring everybody there. And we start intake in the other unit so that we are not cross-contaminating people, and we can then move them out of intake and into a general housing unit. We also have discontinued all programs in the jail, all visits, and so forth, which I'll get to on another slide, but we've discontinued that to minimize as much contamination, cross-contamination as possible. We've also started, you can see these two different machines here. We've been using a static cleaning machine for years and years. And that one machine that you can see the gentleman spraying is very old. And it's, as my grandmother would say, has been duct taped and bobby pinned together to keep it going. We ordered in January new static cleaners, which are the new ones, but unfortunately the cleaning supplies for those are, we're still waiting for them to come in. So we're using our old machine cleaning the courthouse and the jail with the electric static sprayer. Next slide, please. As I said, we're taking temperatures, but we're also providing appropriate PPE to our staff. Gloves have been something that we always use and have been using forever, but staff are all wearing masks now. I've mandated that all staff wear masks, cloth face coverings, a surgical mask, or a PPE or N95 mask, depending on the circumstances of where they are and where they're working. They are wearing them anywhere that they cannot either appropriately social distance in their workspace and or are in public space in the jail and or the courthouse. And when I say public space in the jail, I mean if they're getting on an elevator, they're moving around in the facility, they go to staff dining, that they are to be wearing some kind of covering. In addition, we've also got a couple female inmates that have been helping us make face cloth coverings. All of our inmates now are wearing them anytime that they come out of their cell and are in a public area. We're also limiting how much time they're getting out because of concerns of spreading the virus. Anybody that comes into the jail is now being required to put on a face covering and so forth. So, and that includes anybody that's arrested, a new arrestee. Next slide. In addition, we've been working very closely with Parissa and the Commonwealth Attorney's Office and with our courts. We'll continue to be working with them on how we reopen court. We just had a Zoom meeting or a WebEx meeting this afternoon with General District Court about traffic court and how that might operate. We're meeting on Friday with Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court to figure out sort of how that will operate. I have asked the Chief Judge of the Circuit Court to issue an order that anyone that comes into the courthouse from the public be wearing some kind of a face covering, cloth face mask. We will and are working with the county to ensure we have something that we can give people if they come without that. But we really will be trying to minimize how many people are coming into the courthouse. I'm sure for the extended future, due to the safety and security, the safety of everybody when it comes to COVID. And we will continue working with the county to ensure that we're sterilizing areas in the courthouse. I think that's kind of the end of my formal speech, and we can move to questions.
Many groups cannot get access to the inmates now in the detention facility. Chris would like to know how that we are informing them about the upcoming elections and the procedures for absentee by mail ballots and so forth.
Len, I'm sorry, but I missed the first part of your question. There was no audio there.
Okay, okay, can you hear me now?
I can
yeah.
hear you now,
Right.
but I
Chris?
got you somewhere in the middle of your question.
Okay, Chris wants to know, since so many groups and so forth, like League of Women Voters and Spread the Vote, so forth, are no longer visiting the detention facilities, how are we informing the people about the upcoming elections and so forth?
Well, we've always worked with the League of Women Voters, and we've allowed people to come in to register voters. That's actually I hadn't even thought about it. I've given everything else that's been on my plate. We will certainly work with any group to try to facilitate either through, we're actually trying to start doing like FaceTime visits, like on a monthly basis, let everybody do a visit that way, added extra phone calls. But I'm very open if Chris wants to reach out to me through my email at work to sort out how we can do it. We've always made it accessible to anybody that's incarcerated that can register to vote, to allow them to vote and to apply for an absentee ballot. So I don't see that changing. It's just we may have to facilitate it in a different way.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else, or can we move on? Matthew says, and writes his question, there are two conversations taking place in Richmond. One, the early release of those with a year or less to serve based on COVID-19. And two, the early release of more violent inmates without informing the victims or the Commonwealth's attorney in relevant jurisdictions. Any thoughts, any of you, on this? I know we had just one today, didn't we? In the federal?
So I can speak to the effort to get
Okay, Brad, go ahead.
the general effort to get people released because of the risks of COVID-19 and the correctional settings. So as a lot of you probably know, COVID-19 is of particular concern in jails and prisons just because, and that's where the worst outbreaks have happened in the US and in Virginia, because social distancing really is very, if it's not impossible, it's extremely difficult. Medical care is limited. And then you have the issue of jail churn, which is if you're in a jail, particularly in a jail like a local detention facility, people are coming in and out all the time. So, that's an opportunity for the virus to get in and out. So what we've been doing in the state is the governor issued guidance through a budget amendment to allow, and that was passed by the General Assembly, which gave the Department of Corrections discretion to release inmates who fit certain criteria, and those were nonviolent inmates with, I think, less than a year to serve. That doesn't address local inmates, though. That's, for the most part, it's only applicable to people who are in Department of Corrections facilities. So locally, or DOC inmates who are held locally. But what we've been trying to do on a local level is do motions for reconsideration of sentence following similar criteria that the governor and the General Assembly have applied. And also the Supreme Court of Virginia has recommended that we do the same thing. It has been a challenge at the local level. I don't think everybody sees the risks the same way. So we've encountered some roadblocks, and I know my office organized an effort to get clemency for a large class of individuals. I think it's about 60 of them who fit the criteria that Governor Northam had established. And we've been working with the Commonwealth's attorney to get those people clemency, and they've been open to that for a number of them. I think it's maybe a little more than a third, maybe 40% of them. We're awaiting the governor's decision about whether he's going to act on that. But that has been, there have been different legal mechanisms that people have pursued in Virginia and elsewhere, but that's what's been going on in Arlington most recently.
Any other comments, or should we move on? Or
I just would comment that we've received notification from the Department of Corrections on, I think, 5 or 6 individuals between now and July that they are releasing based on nonviolent offenses, the amount of their sentence that's left. But that's, we're just following their procedures as we would with anybody else being released. But I would comment on the violent criminals that are being released through the parole board, and only the one instance where the gentleman was accused of murder, has been convicted, not accused, of murdering a police officer. The law enforcement community across the Commonwealth of Virginia has been outraged by the process and the fact that the family wasn't notified. And so my understanding is now the Attorney General is at least reviewing the process, and the IG for the state of Virginia are taking a look at it. I think as much as anything, people are outraged just that the family wasn't given an opportunity to come and speak before the parole board. And it just, I don't know. A lot of people have a lot of concerns and issues about it. My understanding from all the articles that I went back and read, the officer was shot 5 times in the neck and in the head. So you can imagine that law enforcement is not very happy about that.
Okay, I have something to put, will put a smile on each of your faces. OAR texted in, people from OAR, and they are grateful for your partnership, and they are saying what a great job each one of you are doing right now. So smile.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Feeling is mutual with OER.
Okay, I have another question here from Sarah. To what extent does the Arlington criminal justice system provide employee training and education concerning like racism, implicit bias, multicultural competency, and so forth? The training.
Well, I'll just jump in. Personally, I did I just did a class in January that I had signed up for that Leadership Arlington hosted. I know Offender Aid and Restoration has actually been hosting a lot of programs. I've sent a number of my staff to. In fact, I was actually signed up for one of the classes to go to it myself. And because of COVID, they've had to reschedule. And through the academy and other opportunities, we definitely work to send our staff through a lot of programs when we can find them. And they're a lot more plentiful over the last few years than they have been in the past. But I am definitely a huge proponent of sending staff and having these tough conversations.
We were sending staff as well to the OAR meetings, and unfortunately they had to get canceled. And I have been working with some organizations that support reform prosecutors and police departments that are interested in reform as part of my reform university to try to set up some of those trainings internally.
Good.
I would just say not nearly enough is being done. That's my opinion on that subject.
Can you expand on that just a little bit?
I think that I don't think that a lot of people enough people acknowledge that criminal justice reform is a racial justice issue, and they probably don't see their own if they're involved in an agency or unwilling to be self-critical or take a self-inventory to see how they can improve. And that by the way absolutely includes the defense bar and public defenders. Diversity is a huge issue in criminal defense. There's almost a near complete lack of diversity, and we I think very frequently find ourselves in little bubbles, sort of privileged bubbles, and not seeking to understand the issues that a lot of our clients are facing. Communities of color, people that are disproportionately impacted by our justice system. It's just something that I think all stakeholders in the justice system need to take a lot more seriously and be much more deliberate about.
Thank you. Any other comments here? Okay. Let me read John's question to you. Given the Commonwealth's attorneys pledged to reduce both prosecutions and incarcerations, what is your perspective on the current and future staffing levels for each of your offices, as well as for the Arlington Police Department? Does that make sense? The pledge to reduce both prosecutions and incarcerations?
Well, let me just state that I'm actually the last person that has any control over who gets arrested on the street and gets put in jail. So from that perspective, that's not my wheelhouse, and I wouldn't speak for what police staffing issues are. Except to say what I've heard the chief say in many conversations is that they haven't had any additional staff, yet our population has increased over the last 10 or 15 years. I have gotten additional staff over the last 4 or 5 years because we did have a staffing study done. And then we've seen our population go down, but it's kind of complicated, but I can't put, just because if I have 50 people, they can't all go in the exact same housing unit or two. They're broken, down by their custody level, by their sex, by their, if they have mental health issues, we have a mental health unit in the jail. If they're in a treatment unit, they may be in the ACT unit, the Addictions, Corrections, and Treatment program. A lot of times the judges sentence people, or they'll sort of attach that to them. And if you go through this program, we'll reevaluate your sentence. So it's uniquely interesting, but you just have to look at the numbers. And we have actually, prior to this, had closed 2 housing units in the jail because of staffing. But with COVID, we've had to reopen them because we're doing multiple intake units that normally we wouldn't do.
Okay, thank you.
So
Marissa, any comment on that? Or Brad, go ahead.
I'll try to be brief.
Yeah.
To enlighten the people who are watching this is really odd, but Virginia law actually creates an incentive for prosecutors to over-prosecute cases by tying their fund staffing levels, like the number of positions they get funded for by the state compensation board, tying that to the number of felony prosecutions and convictions they obtain. It's super bizarre. And actually, my group, with the help of Delegate Marcus Simon, introduced a bill last year to get rid of that incentive. It didn't make it through, but they're studying it. And I expect next year that's going to be eliminated. But it is very weird. And, but what I would say on the flip side of that is what we ought to be doing is funding prosecutors more when they do more diversion. When they spend more time with restorative justice, with the programs that are constructive. And the fact of the matter is those programs actually require, I would say, a lot more effort and a lot more staff. My office, over the years when we were founded, we actually were slated to have 13 attorneys. We now only have 10, partly because of that problem I mentioned before of a couple of the judges just not giving us cases. We didn't have a caseload to support it. But another thing that happens with my office's staffing levels is we don't get any credit for our participation in diversion initiatives. So we dedicate an attorney a great deal of time each week to the drug treatment court. We don't get any credit with our state agency for that. So they don't take that into consideration when determining how many positions we're supposed to get. They also don't take into consideration that we've got somebody who is now pledged to the mental health docket or to the restorative Arlington. It's just something, it's sort of like a paradigm shift that needs to happen throughout the state and locally. And so I guess that's a roundabout way of answering the question. I don't actually know that prosecuting fewer cases means you should have less staff. It means we just need to think about this whole problem differently.
I actually agree with Brad completely. Reducing prosecutions doesn't actually, it's not necessarily going to reduce staff. It just refocuses staff, and it refocuses staff in a way that ultimately is going to create a safer community. Reform isn't free. And Virginia has been doing criminal justice on the cheap, both on the defense side and the prosecution side. And they've been doing it, as Brad said, with a very perverse incentive for prosecutors to have felony convictions and felony sentencing events, because that is the basis upon which the funding is given. We are internally trying to figure out, the Virginia Association of Commonwealth Attorneys, trying to figure out different ways of measuring what we do other than convictions. And that includes looking at, how much community engagement are we doing? How much preventative work are we doing? And how much are we doing that is sort of out of the box diversionary that actually has better results than the traditional retributive types of justice that we've been working on, that we've been engaged in.
Okay, thank you. We don't ask people to give accolades, but they are coming in. Matthew says, thank you for the good work. Corey says, thank you for all you're doing. And anyway, Najma has a question for Parissa. She says, but anybody can answer. Are you pushing for expunging records for simple possession of marijuana? Or does that come after legalization?
So that's a great question, Najma. What happened this year with all of the expungement statutes, including the expungement pieces that were on the marijuana decriminalization and legalization bills, is that they ended up getting separated and sent off to the Crime Commission for study. I would like to see expungement next year, as well as legalization and regulation.
Virginia law doesn't allow for that. Parissa just said that, but until there's a statute that allows for expungement, it can't happen.
Okay.
And some of the concern with expungement is that the current way that expungement works is that the records have to be removed from everything, and even referring to a record that's been expunged is a misdemeanor. So what we really need to do is some kind of thing that's like expungement, but perhaps a little bit different from expungement, so that law enforcement can still access records, but so that, and basically people don't have an albatross around their necks unnecessarily.
Does expungement mean expungement? Let's say we had that in place. Say you're 20 years old and you got caught doing some marijuana stuff or possession even, and then it gets expunged. Is it ever really expunged? Could I really go find it if I had?
In this day and age, no. I mean, once it's online somewhere, it's probably going to be there.
Yeah.
But I mean, it certainly helps because when they're, when companies are doing background checks, I mean, to not have it in databases and to be able to say that you haven't been convicted or you don't have a criminal record, that helps a heck of a lot.
Michael has a question, or some asking for two comments to explain restorative justice program. What is it designed to accomplish?
Well, I'm happy to take that question.
Good, Parissa.
I'll try to be brief. And it's easier to understand contrasted with retributive justice. Retributive justice, the model that we currently work in, asks what law was broken, who broke it, and how do we punish them. In contrast, restorative justice asks who was harmed, what do they need to heal, and who is responsible for that healing. And that is the fundamental difference between retributive and restorative justice. And restorative justice, we've seen from studies and meta-studies, help the victims and survivors heal more quickly and more thoroughly from the trauma that they've endured. And they actually reduce recidivism significantly by, sometimes upwards of 20 percentage points, because it actually requires work. It's more than just, people sitting in a room in a mediation. It requires a tremendous amount of work on the part of the person who did the harm, to really try to put things right. And in that process, they transform into somebody who won't do that harm again.
Okay, should we do another one here? We have room for a couple more questions. That's it. Camilla asks, can you talk about the concern that legalization of cannabis impacts? I see we got a lot of these questions, don't we? About the rates of schizophrenia, a sort of a science question, especially when use starts at a young age, and what can be done to mitigate these adverse effects? Any comments by any of you folks?
I've never heard that pot causes schizophrenia. I think that's probably up for debate. I have heard that K2 or spice, synthetic marijuana can cause psychotic symptoms, but never heard that for
Okay.
Regular
All right.
organic stuff. I mean, obviously, I think there is research that supports the idea that pot can be harmful to minors or people whose brains are still developing. So can alcohol, though. I mean, I think we have a roadmap for how to deal with that with other substances. I don't know why marijuana would be any different. It is obviously important to protect young people from things that would harm them or harm their development. That's sensible and that ought to be done.
Okay. I have one other question here, addressed specifically to Sheriff Arthur. Have you considered continuing ADF programming remotely using video conferencing? I'm sure there are security issues and most platforms are set up to address those.
Well, that requires you to have people that can make all that happen. And the deputy, so a deputy is assigned to a housing unit, and let's just say they have 40 individuals in there. They have very sort of, if you would, rigid things that they have to do throughout their shift for 12 hours. So trying to bring in video programming, we don't have the technology right now to do a lot of that. We actually have a contract out on the street right now to get a new phone system, which part of that system would require us being able to be able to utilize tablets. We've been working with a college that's willing to come in and do free college work. And if we had that technology available, then we would have tablets, and then we definitely could be bringing programs in remotely. We've been working actually with OAR to try to see if we can't come in and bring some programming in remotely to some of our units, because right now we sort of have stopped. But we do need to figure out, and I've asked my staff to start figuring out how do we start doing some things, because part of our concern right now is we're minimizing who comes in and out of the jail, in and out of housing units. I normally inspect the jail every Thursday at 9 a.m. I'll walk over there, I'll go in and out of housing units, talk to staff, talk to inmates. I'm not even doing that myself because the way this virus works, you can be walking around asymptomatic and be contagious. And so we're being very, very careful about how we're interacting with inmates, and staff are more likely to bring it in than we are, with the exception of somebody coming in off the street. Staff are who are going to bring it into the facility. So we're being very, very careful to minimize that. As Brad mentioned, you have a lot of, I'm knocking on wood right now as I say this out loud, but you have a lot of jails and prisons across this country that are having epidemics. And so we are really minimizing bringing people into the facility. So I don't have the technology right now to let us run programs, but we are looking at how we can potentially do that. Safety is my first and foremost responsibility for people that are remanded to my custody. And so that is what I have to take. It has to be my first and foremost responsibility, and then everything else comes after that. So that's my long-winded answer of, I don't have the ability right this minute, but we're working towards trying to do something.
We are coming to the end here, good people, and this has been a delightful evening for me to listen to you guys and try to field these questions. Committee of 100, of course, is groping towards the same places that you guys are talking about. Technology, I hear technology. Each one of you has said something about technology. But as you are, last comments here, say you're talking to the voters here, people who actually can make a difference, what would you ask them about technology? I mean, I was shocked when, who was it? Parissa said that you have 125 and you need 30 meg or something on the machines. What would you tell the voters if you could tell them something right now that you need for technology? All or any?
I'm giving the floor to Parissa. She's been dealing with this issue. We spent a lot of time talking about it.
Yeah, I feel like I said way too much earlier.
Well, this is your last chance.
That's it in a nutshell. That the courthouse has been very neglected in terms of making sure that we have Wi-Fi that works, in terms of making sure that we have equipment that works. I mean, it's difficult for us to even do legal research in a courtroom, very quickly based on the equipment that we currently have, and playing videos is very challenging. So that's what I would say. We need to invest in the courthouse to make lives easier for all of the attorneys and for the sheriff's department.
I would,
Including the defense bar.
Sheriff, go ahead.
and I would just throw in here, having been around a very, very, very long time, the courthouse is now 25 years old, and it really has not had any upgrades done to it. To piggyback on what Paris is saying, a little bit of technology things here and there, but where we are with technology today versus where we were 25 years ago, and the jail is 26 years old, and the jail, while we have done upgrades, it is a solid concrete building with rebarb every 3 inches. So it is not that easy to just come in and rewire and upgrade. That's, we have done a lot of things, but it's still an evolution of how you do it. You've got to have money to do it. The county has done a study on the courthouse, but the dollar amount that it's going to cost to do some security upgrades, as well as the technology upgrades, it's a lot of money. And, I've floated out there that, it's not a capital project, in my opinion, but I am not the finance. I don't do finance. That's the county board and the county manager's job. I can throw out my opinions about what's got to happen, but we can't, if we did this with capital projects, COVID aside, and the fact that we just, our revenues have gone off a cliff, it's going to take 10 years to upgrade the courthouse. And the judges, rightfully so, have security concerns about their space. Any of us could go up there. Their doors are not as secure as they should be. Their workspace getting in and out of is not as secure as it should be in today's environment. So maybe we'll be coming back to you, Parissa and I, talking about what we think should be done to upgrade the courthouse and the jail for us to have better technology.
We will be ready at any time. Brad, last word? Anything for the good of the cause? Okay.
I do have a last word. So nothing good happens in criminal justice reform unless the community stays involved and informed. That is when people don't know anything, when they're not staying connected because maybe they don't know someone who's involved or they're not personally involved in the system. That's when crazy stuff happens. And only with information, only if you're engaged and connected, will you know if we're doing the right things and making the progress that needs to be made. So I would encourage everybody who's listening and watching to stay connected. A lot of great stuff is going to be happening in Arlington on this front. And yeah, thanks.
Okay, that's it. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Now, my producer tells me he has one last slide to show us, and there it is. Thank you, Mr. Producer Scott. And that is the advertisement or the for the next meeting, which is June 10, the special election. And our format will be the same. And that's it. To our panel again, thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been a very interesting evening. Thank you all, each and all. And good night, everybody. Stay safe.
Good night.
Good night.